She was supposed to be on a flight to Portland, heading to her sister's lake house for the holidays. Her bag was already checked, her boarding pass in hand, but just as she reached the long-term parking lot, something stopped her cold. She had forgotten the original will, Malcolm Hartley will, the real one, not the copy she kept in the desk drawer. She turned the car around, thinking she'd be in and out in 5 minutes. But what she walked into was something no mother should ever hear. Not in her own home, not from her only son. The front door creaked softly when she opened it. She didn't call out. The air inside felt still, too still. Her keys rested in her palm, but she didn't drop them into the bowl like she always did. Something in her chest went quiet. She stepped into the hallway, shoes brushing against the wood floor. The voices came from the study low, deliberate, careful. She paused behind the archway, back against the wall, barely breathing. "If she's showing signs, we can make the case," said a voice she recognized too well. "Mr. Crane, she's 74, another voice replied. With the right filing, diminished capacity isn't hard to demonstrate. Ashby, that was the name. The lawyer Grant brought around after Mr. Crane passed under the pretense of helping sort out Dad's things. Her heart thudded, slow and heavy. She couldn't see them, but she could feel the shape of their conversation. They were talking about guardianship, about her. Ashby continued, "I've already started compiling the list. She's been misplacing things, repeating stories. She barely touched her taxes last year. She wanted to step forward, to shout his name, but instead, she backed away carefully. She didn't want the floorboards to give her away." Outside, the afternoon sun was warm, but everything in her had gone cold. She got back into her car and sat there staring through the windshield, the keys still in her hand. The woman who had raised him, who had worked night shifts in archives so he could go to college without loans, was now being cataloged like a case file. She pressed her lips together, not in anger, in disbelief. That was the moment something inside her shifted. Not shattered, not yet. But the warmth in her chest, what was left of it, started to cool. And you know what the hardest part was? It wasn't what she heard. It was realizing how long she'd ignored what she already knew. If you've ever seen your own child turn into a stranger in your own home, you'll understand what that means. This was the day she stopped being a mother first and started becoming something else entirely. Let's go there. She didn't go back to the airport. She didn't call her sister. She just kept driving. Her hands stayed steady on the wheel, but her mind floated elsewhere. She passed the turnoff to the interstate and let instinct guide her through old streets she hadn't seen in decades. By the time she stopped the car, she was parked in front of a bakery, tucked between a laundromat and a faded barber shop. The awning was new, but the smell drifting through the open door was exactly the same. Cinnamon, butter, toasted almonds. This was the place Malcolm Hartley brought her every Sunday, rain or shine. Back when they lived in a 2-bedroom apartment off Union Street. Back when Nathan Hartley was still a boy with scraped knees and a mind full of inventions. She walked inside. The counter had been replaced with something sleek and polished, but the tables were still mismatched, each with a little vase of flowers. She ordered a coffee and sat by the window. Her fingers curled around the cup, seeking warmth, something to anchor her. Her eyes wandered to the sidewalk. People passed by in thick coats, heads down, moving quickly. She remembered Arthur reading the paper at this same table, while Nathan Hartley stacked sugar packets into towers. He used to ask questions about everything: bridges, trains, how elevators worked. He didn't want simple answers. He wanted blueprints. And she gave them to him. She brought home books from the library and circled paragraphs in pencil. She signed him up for robotics camp before he even asked. He was curious, not entitled, at least back then. Somewhere between that boy and the man she overheard this morning, something changed. Not overnight, not suddenly. Like a kettle left too long on the stove, the steam began quietly, then hissed, until the room filled with it. She remembered when he insisted on handling Malcolm Hartley's estate, when he replaced their family accountant with a firm she had never heard of, when he set up automatic payments for her property taxes without asking. She had seen the signs, but she had given him the benefit of the doubt. A tired mother's trust, a widow's hope. Now it all rearranged itself, like flipping puzzle pieces that had been forced into place. Suddenly, the picture was clear. She left the bakery after finishing half the coffee. The taste lingered bitter on her tongue, not from the beans, but from memory. Outside, the sky had turned gray. She zipped her coat up to her chin and stood still for a moment. She wasn't ready to go home yet. Not because she was afraid, because she needed to remember who she had been before she started letting others define her. And this quiet detour was the beginning. The parking lot behind the library was mostly empty when she arrived. It was late afternoon, the sky already slipping into the soft gray of early winter. She pulled into the same spot she used to choose when she worked there. Muscle memory, old habits. She sat for a moment, watching the branches of the big oak near the back door sway gently in the wind. Inside, everything was quieter than she remembered. The carpets had been replaced, the checkout stations upgraded, but the smell was the same. Ink dust and old wood. A scent that always made her feel calm, capable, whole. She walked straight past the fiction stacks and into the back toward the archives room. It hadn't changed much. Same tall filing cabinets. Same beige overhead lights that flickered if you looked at them too long. She nodded at the young woman at the desk and asked if she could review a document she had once cataloged. A copy of her husband's will. The woman didn't question her, just slid a clipboard forward and pointed her toward the corner table. She found the file without trouble. Her hands still knew where to look. The folder was thick, not because of the will itself, but because of Malcolm's notes. He had always annotated everything, margins lined with arrows, dates, abbreviations in his clipped handwriting. It made sense to him, and over the years it had come to make sense to her too. She spread the pages out carefully, scanned each line. The will was intact. Nothing crossed out. But what caught her eye were the sticky notes he had left inside the folder. One said, "Eleanor, if you ever feel unsure, the answer is always in the numbers." She turned to the last page. There was a chart, a breakdown of assets, property, investments, bonds. Next to each, a note. E to retain. E or Nathan, if qualified legal hold, until independent review. Not Nathan to manage. Not full access for son. Malcolm had been precise. He had trusted her. She felt the heat rise in her chest. Not from anger, from recognition, from memory, from the sensation of finally slipping back into her own skin. She pulled a notepad from her bag and started making a list. First, copies. Second, legal counsel. Third, audit of recent account changes. She underlined each one with slow, steady pressure. By the time she stepped out of the library, the sun had dipped below the rooflines. The sky had turned a soft navy blue. The cold air didn't bother her. She walked to the car with purpose. Her breath clouded in front of her, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel old. She didn't feel confused. She didn't feel like someone being managed. She felt like Eleanor Hartley, the woman who used to organize rare collections, who could recite policy by heart, who once found a lost Revolutionary War letter behind a broken file cabinet, and who would now find her way back, one document at a time. That morning, she moved slowly, not because her body ached, but because she needed the illusion to be real. She tucked a small voice recorder into the lining of her coat. It was one she used to use during interviews at the library, barely the size of a thumb, with a soft click to start recording. She made sure the red light blinked once, then disappeared into the wool. She left the door unlocked. The sun was just high enough to cast shadows across the kitchen floor. She turned off the overhead lights, letting the natural light do its quiet work. She made tea spill just a little on the counter, then left the kettle slightly ajar. Subtle messes, the kind that could be mistaken for forgetfulness. By 10:30, Nathan arrived. She had not asked him to. He rarely called before showing up these days. He walked in with a grocery bag and that careful smile he used when he wanted something. She sat at the kitchen table in her robe, a crossword half filled in front of her, a pen without a cap. She looked up slowly. He kissed her cheek and commented on how chilly the house felt. She nodded, said she must have forgotten the heat again. He set the bag down and pulled out a container of soup, a loaf of bread, and a tin of crackers. The performance began. He asked how she had been sleeping. She said she wasn't sure, then changed the subject mid-sentence. She let her hands fumble slightly with the spoon. When he offered to warm the soup, she smiled and said yes, as if he were doing her a favor. Nathan moved around the kitchen like someone taking inventory. His eyes scanned the calendar, the pills by the sink, the unopened mail. He commented on a letter from the insurance company. She said she hadn't gotten around to opening it. He offered to go through it for her. She pretended not to hear. After lunch, he leaned against the doorframe and looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something that confirmed what she already knew. He told her he had been researching care homes. Just options, he said. Places with gardens, music therapy, staff trained in memory care. He said it softly, like it was something kind. She blinked, then smiled faintly. Said it might be nice to have someone else do the cooking. Then she asked him what day it was. He looked satisfied. As he packed up the dishes, she sat quietly, staring out the window. The recorder had been running the entire time. Every word, every pause, every calculated kindness. After he left, she locked the door and sat down in the study. She took off the coat and placed the recorder gently on the desk. Her hands didn't shake. In silence, she replayed the moment in her mind. Not out of anger, but precision. Because now she had something more than memory. She had evidence. And the silence, once unbearable, had become her greatest ally. The next morning, she found Judith's old number in a yellowed Rolodex tucked behind her cookbook shelf. She hadn't spoken to her in years, not because they had drifted apart, but because life had folded in on itself after Malcolm passed. They had worked together for 15 years at the university library. Judith was sharp, always one step ahead, and had this way of spotting the flaw in a plan before it unraveled. She called and left a message. Her voice was calm, direct. She told her she needed a legal mind she could trust, and that it was personal. Within the hour, Judith texted back. She'd be at the house by 4:00. When she arrived, her presence filled the room without taking it over. She wore a navy wool coat, hair pulled back in a tight knot. She looked like herself, grounded. No pleasantries, no forced smiles. They sat at the kitchen table. She poured chamomile tea into mismatched cups, then slid the recorder and a file across the table to Judith. No explanations, just quiet. Judith listened to the recording all the way through. Her expression didn't change. When it ended, she looked at her and said, "We're going to fix this." She opened her laptop. Her fingers moved fast. She asked about the existing power of attorney and whether it had been updated since Malcolm's passing. She said, "No." Judith nodded. The first thing they'd do was revoke Nathan's authority, then draft a new will, designate a trusted executor, and notify the state of the changes. Everything would be documented and time-stamped. Judith asked if she had any digital backups. She said no. Judith told her they'd fix that too. Over the next hour, Judith outlined a plan. It was clean, quiet, legal. Everything Nathan had assumed she'd forgotten, she was about to rewrite. Judith was precise but never cold. She wasn't surprised. She had seen this before, not always with children, but with those who believed access meant ownership. They moved to the den. Judith scanned copies of Malcolm's annotated will. She helped her set up encrypted cloud storage. She even created a dedicated folder labeled Eleanor, Legal, Private. She explained how to update entries, where to store medical reports, and which versions to retain. Before Judith left, she placed a single sheet in front of her. It was a formal revocation of power of attorney. Her name, Nathan's name, the date. She signed it. Judith slid the paper into her briefcase. Her final words were simple. This is the first step. After Judith left, she sat by the window, watching the bare branches of the dogwood tree sway in the wind. The house was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't an empty quiet. It was the sound of something solid being rebuilt. One decision at a time. One document at a time. One version of herself at a time. And she wasn't alone anymore. The days that followed unfolded with quiet precision. Judith had given her a checklist. But by the second morning, she no longer needed to read it. The rhythm of protecting herself settled into routine. The kind of order she hadn't felt since the early years of archiving, when each document told its own story, and her job was simply to preserve it. She began with her medical records. She scheduled an appointment with Dr. Elkins, the same physician she had seen for over a decade. During the visit, she requested a cognitive evaluation, not because she had any doubt, but because she wanted it in writing. Dr. Elkins didn't question her. He ran the assessment, checked her reflexes, reviewed her chart, then handed her a signed letter. Cognitively sound, no signs of impairment. She folded it carefully and slid it into the file folder she now carried in her bag. Back home, she gathered everything she could find that confirmed her mental clarity. Grocery receipts, bank statements with handwritten notes in the margins, emails printed out from the last 2 years. She made lists, dated each page, organized them into categories: legal, medical, personal. She labeled folders the same way she used to label historical collections: clear, consistent, irrefutable. She scanned every page into her new cloud storage. Judith had walked her through it twice. Now she could do it with her eyes closed. She used a scanner Judith had lent her small but fast. Each file saved with a timestamp. Each document, a small brick in the wall she was building. Between her and the person Nathan thought she had become, in the back of her closet, behind old winter coats and an unused suitcase, she found a box labeled Malcolm, Misk. Inside were letters. Most were notes from their early marriage years, full of mundane things, grocery lists, reminders, little hearts drawn beside his name. But one stood out. A single page, handwritten in his bold script, dated 10 years ago. No envelope, just folded into quarters and stuck between 2 travel brochures. It read, "If the day comes when our son makes you doubt yourself, trust your instinct. You've always seen clearer than you believe." She sat on the edge of the bed with the letter in her lap. The house was still. Her heart beat steady. The wind outside picked up, brushing against the windows like fingertips. Malcolm had known, not the details, but the possibility. He had seen something she wasn't ready to see then. She was ready now. That night, she backed up everything again. She sent copies to Judith and stored a flash drive in the safety deposit box. She added a final note to her journal. There is no such thing as overprepared when someone is trying to erase you. And she slept without turning the hallway light on. For the first time in weeks, she didn't wake up to check the locks. She had done the work, and she was no longer playing defense. She was documenting her survival in her own handwriting, in real time. He showed up on a Wednesday. She hadn't heard the car pull in, but the doorbell rang just after noon. She took a slow breath and walked to the door without rushing. When she opened it, Nathan stood there. holding a paper bag in one hand and a small bouquet of supermarket tulips in the other. He smiled, that same soft expression he used to wear after getting caught sneaking a snack before dinner. She stepped aside and let him in without a word. The tulips were yellow. She thanked him and placed them in the old green vase on the dining room table. He commented on how quiet the house was, said it felt peaceful. She agreed. He unpacked the bag in the kitchen without asking. A container of vegetable soup, a crusty roll, a chocolate bar. She offered to heat the soup, but he waved her off and did it himself. He moved through the kitchen like he belonged there. He always had. They sat at the table. He asked how she'd been sleeping. She told him some nights were better than others. He nodded and asked if she'd considered hiring someone to check in once or twice a week. She said it might not be a bad idea. She let her spoon linger in the broth. Her hands moved slower than usual. He watched her closely, the way someone watches a dial they've just adjusted. Then he began talking about places he'd looked into. Assisted living communities with wellness programs, walking paths, private rooms. He said it gently like it was just a suggestion. He said she deserved rest, that it wasn't safe to be alone too much. She looked down, ran her fingers along the edge of the napkin, and said she would consider it. His face softened, maybe even with relief. When he offered to drive her to tour one of the places next week, she smiled again and said, "Perhaps." Then she asked him to remind her what day it was. He told her, and she nodded like she'd forgotten. She let the pause stretch between them. He stayed another half hour, walked through the hallway as if checking for things she might have missed, pointed out a flickering light bulb in the laundry room, mentioned that the porch railing looked loose. She took note of everything he noticed. Before he left, he touched her shoulder gently and said he just wanted the best for her. She placed her hand over his and said she knew. As soon as the door closed behind him, she walked to the back window and watched him sit in his car. He stayed there, a while typing something into his phone. His mouth moved slightly, as if rehearsing. She turned and walked into the study. The small recorder in the bookshelf had been running since the moment he arrived. Every sentence, every suggestion, every careful word archived. Later that evening, she uploaded the file, labeled it, "Visit Nathan Assisted Living Discussion." The performance was nearly perfect, but so was the record. The morning after Nathan's visit, she rearranged the living room, not because it needed it, but because she wanted to make space under the side table for a second recording device. The placement mattered. He often paced near the window when he was nervous. She tested the angle, ensured the microphone would catch any conversation on the porch as well. She left the front door unlocked again, a gesture of openness, vulnerability. Then she moved slowly around the kitchen, deliberately placing little signals of forgetfulness. She left the refrigerator slightly open, set the measuring cup in the sink instead of the cabinet. When she walked past the hallway mirror, she tousled her hair just enough to look like she hadn't noticed. At 10:40, his car pulled in again. He came up the steps, humming something. She stepped out onto the porch with a cardigan pulled tightly around her shoulders and asked what brought him back. He said he was in the neighborhood just checking in. He handed her a new packet from the care center he'd mentioned before. She held it with both hands, let her fingers shake just a little. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she sat on the porch swing and asked him what time it was. He smiled, answered softly, and sat beside her. She glanced down at the folder and whispered that the pictures looked nice. He leaned in, describing the walking paths and the music room like he was selling a vacation home. Then he brought up the paperwork, said he had spoken to someone named Ashby, a legal advisor he trusted, that Ashby could help file the necessary documents. He said he wanted everything in place so there'd be no confusion if something happened. She nodded slowly, kept her eyes on the street. He stepped away to take a phone call. She heard his voice drift in through the open window. He spoke clearly, but not loudly. Ashby's name came up again, along with phrases like expedited review, mental competence. Next week, she's close to ready. She sat still, not stiff, not rigid, just quiet. The porch mic caught every word. When he came back, he brought her a cup of tea. She thanked him, asked if they had spoken about this last time. He smiled like he was proud of her for remembering. Then he asked if she wanted to visit the center on Thursday. She said she would think about it. She took a sip of the tea, let it linger on her tongue, said the flavor reminded her of something Malcolm used to make. He didn't respond, just nodded and said he'd call her tomorrow. After he left, she went back inside and carefully disconnected the mic under the porch ledge. She uploaded the new file to the archive folder and labeled it clearly. Later that night, Judith came by. She brought her tablet, and they transferred everything to 2 encrypted backups. She showed Judith the notes Nathan had left behind in the care center brochure. He had circled a line in the admissions policy, transfer of medical proxy contingent on observed need. Judith looked at her, then handed her a folder of her own. Inside was a sworn affidavit confirming her current legal and medical capacity, signed by Dr. Elkins and 2 notaries. The game had shifted. Nathan believed he was closing in, but she was already documenting his every move. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was not just surviving, she was preparing to be seen. 3 days after Nathan's last visit, Judith submitted the formal response to Ashby's office. The envelope was heavy with documentation. The affidavit of mental capacity, the newly notarized power of attorney, the updated will, a written notice declaring all prior authorizations null. Everything was logged, time-stamped, signed in duplicate. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was a shield. She didn't send it by email. She delivered it in person. A quiet visit to the downtown legal complex where Ashby's firm kept a second-floor office above a dental practice. She left it with the receptionist, asking only that it be placed directly into his hands. Then she walked away. That evening, she called Eleanor. Her voice was calm, but there was something unreadable beneath it. She said Ashby had called her personally not long after receiving the file, not to argue, not even to defend his position. He said something strange, that he had reviewed everything carefully and that he would be stepping back from the situation. Then, without prompting, he added, Malcolm had once done him a favor during a time when few others would. It wasn't a confession, but it was enough to leave a crack in the wall Nathan had built. Eleanor sat with that call, replaying it in her head. She pulled out Malcolm's handwritten note, again, the one from the old box. She traced the last line with her thumb. The next day, she received a letter by courier. It wasn't from Nathan. It was from Ashby. A brief message typed on firm letterhead. He stated that he would no longer be involved in any legal matters pertaining to her estate. Enclosed was a printed record of all documents filed on her behalf in the last 6 months, including those Nathan had initiated. The paper trail was thorough. Dates, digital logs, proposed drafts, emails. She spent the afternoon reading each line. There were phrases she recognized from conversations with Nathan, sentences repeated word for word. What he said to her, over soup, had appeared in a draft declaration of concern attached to a guardianship proposal. There were even template affidavits, designed to be filled out by neighbors or friends regarding observed memory issues. He had been preparing a case in silence. And now she had his playbook. She called Judith. They agreed on the next step. Judith would prepare a brief statement of intent to be submitted if any further legal motion appeared on Nathan's end. A warning, not a threat, that any attempt to bypass her rights would be considered legal overreach and elder coercion, and it would go on the record. That night, Eleanor placed the letter from Ashby alongside Malcolm's note in the drawer of her nightstand. 2 men, one who had tried to erase her quietly, and one who had left just enough light for her to find her way back. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady, like she had finally moved out of a holding pattern and into clear air. The silence in the house didn't press on her anymore. It stood beside her, strong, waiting. Nathan arrived without warning. No call, no message, just the crunch of tires on gravel and the slow creak of the front gate. She had been expecting this. The letter from Ashby had shifted something. She knew he wouldn't wait long to reassert control. She watched from the window as he walked up the path with a folder under his arm. His pace was measured, but his shoulders were tight. The mask of concern was still there, but thinner now, stretched over something sharper. When she opened the door, she didn't greet him with surprise. She simply stepped aside and invited him in. He followed her into the kitchen, commenting on the smell of cinnamon. She had warmed cider on the stovelet. The scent filled the house on purpose. He didn't sit. He placed the folder on the table and remained standing, as if waiting for a cue. She poured 2 cups, handed him one, and took her seat across from him. The space between them was clean, almost ceremonial. He started softly, mentioning that Ashby had stepped away unexpectedly and that it left things in an unclear place. She nodded. He said he had concerns about certain paperwork being changed without his knowledge. She took a sip of cider, then reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out a small stack of papers. They were clean copies, not confrontational, just facts. The new power of attorney, the updated will, the statement from Dr. Elkins, the notarized affidavit of capacity. She slid them across the table one by one. He didn't pick them up. He just stared. She looked at him then, not angry, not afraid, just clear. She said she had made decisions for herself, legal ones, responsible ones. She said she knew exactly what she was doing and that pretending otherwise would not change that. He didn't respond. His jaw shifted once. His eyes scanned the documents again, then drifted up toward the hallway. She wondered if he was searching for signs, evidence that she had someone else here, or that she was bluffing. Then she said something simple. Not all silence is weakness. He stood still for a moment longer, then gathered the papers, placed them back on the table without folding them, and walked to the door. He didn't slam it. He didn't speak again. He left the way he came. After the sound of the engine faded, she returned to the table, picked up the recorder hidden beneath a napkin holder, and stopped the recording. The file name was already in her head. Quiet confrontation, full clarity. That night, she didn't dream of Nathan's childhood, or Malcolm's voice, or legal phrases echoing down courthouse halls. She dreamt of a room filled with order, labeled boxes, clean ledgers, a window open to crisp air. For the first time in years, her decisions belonged to her alone. And that was enough. The silence that had wrapped itself around the house for weeks began to change, not with noise, but with presence. Judith's daughter, Rachel, arrived just after noon on a bright Saturday. She had a canvas duffel, a laptop bag, and an easy way of moving through the hallway, as if it had always belonged to her. She wasn't loud. She didn't ask too many questions. She set up in the small guest room with quiet confidence, plugging in her hard drive, organizing her textbooks, stacking binders beside the nightstand. Rachel was studying archival science, and she already spoke in that calm, deliberate cadence that reminded Eleanor of her years at the university. By evening, the house felt different. Rachel offered to make tea and stood in the kitchen like it was her own. She hummed while she waited for the kettle. Nothing dramatic, just the tune of a folk song Eleanor hadn't heard in decades. The scent of lemon verbena drifted through the hallway. That night, Eleanor heard her typing from down the hall. Not fast, not frantic, steady. The sound reminded her of Malcolm's old typewriter. the one he kept in the basement long after word processors had taken over. There was something anchoring about it. Over the next few days, Rachel became part of the rhythm. She took out the trash without being asked. She printed labels for some of Eleanor's old photo albums. She asked if she could digitize the notebooks Eleanor had used during her years at the library. She treated everything with care. And she never tried to impress. She simply did the work. On the third day, Eleanor handed over the legal folder to her. Not the originals, but clean copies. The medical affidavit, the POA, the revised will, the audio transcripts. Rachel stored them on an encrypted drive, added backup protocols, and uploaded them into a university-grade secure cloud. Nathan called that night. Eleanor saw his name on the screen, but she let it ring. No message. Later, Rachel sat at the dining table with her laptop and asked if Eleanor wanted to label the boxes in the garage together the next morning. She said yes. It felt like saying yes to something larger than cardboard and tape. It felt like saying yes to motion, to life beyond defense. The rooms no longer echoed when she walked through them. The kitchen had fingerprints again. The floors needed sweeping more often, and she liked it. She wrote in her journal that night just a single sentence. The house is no longer quiet, and neither am I. The morning air had shifted. The trees outside the window rustled with a quiet confidence, like they knew something was over, and something else had begun. She sat at her desk with her journal open, the same one she had been writing in since Malcolm passed. The pages had grown thicker, not just with words, but with clarity. She thought about how far she had come, not in miles, not in achievements that could be counted, but in the slow, deliberate walk back to herself. There had been no shouting, no final slam of a door, just the gathering of small decisions, stacked like stones, on a path she carved alone. She turned to the last page. The ink moved steadily as she wrote, "Let him speak first, then watch him fall." She closed the journal, placed it in the drawer beside Malcolm's letter, and tucked the key into the pocket of her sweater. The kitchen was warm. Rachel had left early for campus, but her teacup still sat by the sink. The steam gone, but the memory there. She walked through the house slowly. Her hands trailed the walls. The photos were back in place. The rug by the front door had a fold where Rachel's backpack had been dropped too many times. The lamp in the hallway flickered once, then settled into its glow. Outside, the wind pushed against the glass gently. She stood at the window and watched the leaves turn over, gold on one side, fading green on the other. There was no announcement, no audience, but she knew something had ended. Not her story, just the part where she waited for someone else to decide how it should unfold. And that was enough. If this story stayed with you, maybe it's because somewhere deep down you've felt that silence, too. The kind that's not weakness, but survival. If you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or made to doubt your own voice, I hope this reminded you that dignity doesn't need permission. You're not alone in your quiet strength, and you never were.